Hello, I'm Bill O'Donnell, and welcome to another program on spirituality. Today I'm excited to invite you into a little secret that we're going to share with you, something that's not very well known across the country and the world, but I expect will be, and that is something called the Course in Miracles. So if you haven't heard about it, it's going to be a refreshing change for those of you, particularly those who are not drawn or feel rejected from your religion of origin and don't feel motivated in that direction. Well, perhaps today we'll have something for you as an alternative to something that perhaps didn't work for you, and also maybe to give you a different perspective on what the true teachings of Jesus Christ really are. And that's sort of what the Course in Miracles has to say. So in that vein, I want to introduce my guest to my immediate left, my dear friend, the Reverend Mary Lou Cook. Welcome, Mary Lou. Mary Lou, we just celebrated her 90th birthday last week, so this is a treat to have you here.
Thank you.
She's been on the show before, but this is something we want to do for a long time. And Don Cardinelli, welcome.
Bob.
Bob, I'm sorry. How many times have I done that? Bob, thank you.
Okay.
And my old friend Jose Armormino. Everybody here is from basically a Judeo-Christian background, but this is something a little different than traditional religion, isn't it? Who would like to start with, tell us a little about the basis of what the Course in Miracles is and how it came about?
Well, I'll start.
Okay.
A Course in Miracles is a way of thinking. It was channeled, the information was channeled in 11, how many years ago? What year?
It was published in '76, but I think the voice came to Helen Schucman, who was a psychologist at Columbia University, and I think the period of dictation, she calls it, she identifies herself as a scribe, and she basically took notes from a voice that identified himself as Jesus, and it's a way to inner peace.
There's these two people at Columbia University were having a lot of trouble getting along, and one morning Bill Tetford said to Helen Schucman, "There must be another way we can get along." And that day later, Helen Schucman started hearing the voice and said, "You are to take dictation." She was a most unwilling scribe. She was Jewish and really an atheist. And so she took notes, and then later that day, Bill Tetford came in and said, "What was it that happened today?" And she said, "I heard a voice, and the voice said it was Jesus, and I was to be the scribe." She said, "I don't know why I was chosen. I don't like it at all. I don't agree with this." And Bill said, "Let me see what the words were." And Bill read it. He said, "Helen, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. Please continue taking the notes." So every day he would come in at the end of the day and read this, and he said, "It's quite beautiful. Please continue." She said if she was very unwilling. She said, "If there's a mistake in grammar, I'm stopping. I'm not going to do it anymore." So it continued for a long time. And one time the voice said, "There's someone you will meet today at lunch." So she went to lunch at Columbia University. A woman came up to her and said, "I understand you have something for me." It turned out the woman was a publisher. She said, "I understand. Please give me your notes." And so started the printing of the course. Then the word got all around the country and in different cities. Of course, it went very fast because it was so beautiful, and the words were about peace and love and how to be happy. And that's what started this whole thing. As far as I'm concerned, I had just been diagnosed with leukemia, and a friend called me in Santa Fe, Megan Harris, said there's a new book out, a new blue book out, the new blue book, and we're studying it on Monday nights. So I started going to that, and that turned my life around. And it was The whole message of the Course was, you always have a choice between peace and fear. I had never heard that. The first half of my life was angry and fearful. I didn't know I had a choice between peace and fear. I immediately started listening and doing that, and it really changed my life completely, and the leukemia got taken care of.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that. Don, how about you? How did you
Bob.
first... Bob, gee, if I do that again, just whack.
It's all right. I'm sitting here, Bob.
I've been doing it all day. Good. Bob, tell us how you first learned about the Course and how it affected you.
Well, I first learned about the Course in 1981. I was a professor at the University of Arizona, and I met a friend of mine, another professor, and I had been doing the S training, and I said I was, I felt I was kind of fed up with that, and I didn't like all the jargon, but I gotten a lot out of it. And he said, well, you're ready for the Course in Miracles. And the next day we had lunch, and he told me about his experience, and I went out and bought the books, and at that time there were 3 books, and now they've published it in 1 volume. That was 1981. I've been reading it almost every day since then. My own background is I was raised in an Italian Catholic family, very devout. I went to Catholic schools. I did all the devotions and, was a good Catholic young man. And then in my 3rd year of college, I left college and I went into the Benedictine monastery.
Where was that?
In Canyon City, Colorado, Holy Cross Abbey. And I studied for 5 years and really, was a devout monk and a serious scholar of the church. And so I really studied that well, and it became a part of me, and it still is. I'm not obviously a practicing Catholic anymore because I do the Course, and that to me is a continuation and a completion of what Jesus taught in the New Testament.
That's good. How about you, Jose?
I also got involved in the Course in the early 80s. I had burning questions like, what is evil? And what is the ego? And who am I? And what is life all about? And those burning questions weren't actually answered for me completely until I picked up the Course, which I picked up twice, actually. The first time I picked it up and I opened it, and I went, too difficult to read, and put it down, which a lot of people do, because it's from another level, actually. And then the second time I picked it up, my questions were really burning at that time, and I needed some help. And so I just opened up the book, which you can do just about at any time, and you'll usually find the answer you're looking for on that page. And so I began to study it on a regular basis, and I was living in the woods in in Oregon, actually, and it began to answer those questions for me. But the greatest thing it did for me was that it gave me peace of mind, and it also allowed me a tremendous amount of self-esteem, where I was able to finally love myself and dig deep within my psyche to find out there were things there that I needed to clear out. And once these issues were cleared out, it's like Om Mani Padme Om, behold the jewel within the lotus. I realized that there was a jewel within myself. And as a result of that, I was able to love everyone else and realize that everyone is the same, that we are all part of creation and we're all part of God. And it just felt so good. And so I thought, well, that's my favorite book. So I just carried it around in my bag every day and read it all the time. And it just, it takes a while to really clear out. And I'm still working on that. But it was just a wonderful thing. And it brought a joy to me that is worth beyond money. There's nothing in the world that I have a desire to need or want anymore, because the jewel is right here, it's right here, and it's in all of us.
Beautiful.
That's fabulous. I mean, I first was exposed to it in the late 70s. A friend of mine got it for me, and quite frankly, it didn't, one of those things where it didn't pick up, and later I was and you had been a Roman Catholic priest before in Los Angeles, and you monk, And I was later to be sent to the Benedictine monastery in Pecos. I became a monk after I was introduced to the course. And I first was exposed to it in real depth by Ken Wapnick at the Feather Pipe Ranch in '83. And his story was phenomenal. It was correct me if I'm wrong, New York Jewish psychologist converts to Catholicism to become a Cistercian monk in Jerusalem, and then he meets Helen Schuckman. And then, as I understand it, he was her personal assistant for the last 7 years of her life and editor of the course. And he did a piece, a book that I had it somewhere, and it was taken from me. It was a cross-reference, from the Bible to the course. And there was a book that, so he took those two and said, okay, there was a book needed, and let's see the correlation. If this is supposed to be the words of Jesus Christ, then let's see the correlation. Right. And the interesting thing, your comment about how many people have picked up this book and were unable to read it, for whatever reason, historical context or whatever. So we're sitting on something that people have to judge for themselves when they get it. If you feel drawn in that way, if this book doesn't leap at you and you don't feel drawn to it, as a lot of these people are, then it might be time to pick up this book. Would that be fair to say?
Now, Bill, I'd like to explain how people study this.
Go ahead.
There are no churches. There's no national organization, especially. The way people study the course is in homes. And in virtually every city in the country, there's a group that meets. And in the big cities, there are many groups that meet in homes, or they rent a church room or something. And so in Santa Fe, that's all I can talk about. We started a church which was the first church. It was called the Dispensable Church. And Hugh Prather started this church. Hugh Prather and I worked together to start this church. And it went for 3 years and then dispensed. So until then, the groups have been meeting in my home and they're meeting all over the city of Santa Fe. So if a person hears this in another city, you simply run a want ad and say, where is the meeting of A Course in Miracles group in Boston or wherever it is, and you'll get answers. They meet all over the country, but always quietly, and no leader especially. In our group, we met for 28 years in my home until I sold my home and moved to a small condo. But and now we meet at the Church of Religious Science every Wednesday noon in Santa Fe. And yet there are other groups that meet in Santa Fe.
Yeah, and for the credits, I had to just put, you're going to have to Google, wherever you see this, you'll have to Google up A Course in Miracles, and then you'll find where you're led to find other people who are also seekers, aren't they?
You have to be searching. You're a seeker.
Yeah. But Bob, as a scholar, and tell us about your experience because you obviously were deep into the Roman Catholic Church and the faith. Tell us the difference in your experience of reading the Bible and then reading the Course.
Well, in the Course, the author refers to the Bible. It doesn't refer to the Old Testament or the New Testament. And basically, what you see is that in the Old Testament, the law was needed, and the law was codified, and it became, for example, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. In the New Testament, there was a continuation, a moving on, and it was love thy neighbor, love thy enemy. And in the Course, Jesus basically continues on and fulfills what many times the apostles didn't quite get when he was there with them. And so that's what I have found in the Course, where you get a sense that the Old Testament is referenced and respected. The New Testament is referenced, respected, and explained in the Course. And so it's, some scholars call it the Third Testament. Old Testament, New Testament, and the next testament of the Third Testament. I've been fascinated by the gentle ways where the author of the Course, Jesus, would say, it says in the Bible, and he's referred to the New Testament, but he'll say, it says this, but this is what I said. And he doesn't say the Bible is wrong or the writers are wrong. He leads gently to the next level. And so that's what I have found. And the purpose of the course is stated very, very clearly, and it's the purpose of the New Testament too, to remove the blocks to the awareness of love's presence, or of God's presence, which is love. And we are one with God. We've never separated. And this would be different than Catholic theology, where there is sin, and sin is looked on as a separation from God. But that is an illusion. We didn't really separate because we couldn't separate. We're one with God. And so there's some real differences between my Catholic faith, because sin exists in Catholic faith. In the Course, sin does not exist. Mistakes exist, but not sin. Nothing can separate you from God except your own mind, which thinks you're separated from God. And the Course teaches you a way to get back to that oneness, and that oneness is through forgiveness.
Well, I am a practicing Catholic, and I don't see any inconsistency there, because my training taught me that sin is not wrong or bad. It merely means missing the mark.
Right.
And you, and the church teaching is, you decide if it's ultimately sin. If you don't believe it's a sin, it's not. So sin and grace are still good systems in that regard. We don't have any problem. But I think maybe we ought to give some examples. If you have your book there, is there something here, people are probably wondering at home, well, what's actually in it? What can you tell us, either of you guys
Maybe
tell us about
Jose.
what's actually in it? Or
I like all of it, but
Yeah.
I really like the part, I don't know exactly where it is, but the part on relationships is very important. Relationships are very, the people you live with and you rub elbows with, you're going to find your salvation not only in yourself, you're going to find it in the sister and the brother that you live with or that you rub elbows with on a daily basis. Because if you think you find the kingdom of God within yourself, but not in another, then you're missing the mark.
yeah.
So relationships is one thing, and guilt is another. Having been raised Christians, we Catholics and Christians, we tend to have difficulty dealing with guilt. And I thought I had my guilt taken care of when I left the Roman Church in '69. But then after delving into the Course, I delved into my psyche, subconscious, a little bit deeper, and realized I still had a lot of guilt there. But one of the most relieving things is once you let all of that guilt go and realize that there's only one thing that exists, and it's love, and there is no opposite to love. Fear and pain and sorrow and politics and wars and all of those things that we tend to be attracted to through the media, which we have to be careful of, because by being attracted to those negative things, we're feeding that. So the Course to me helps me and reminds me that only love is real and everything else is illusion.
Yeah.
I could follow up on that.
Please do.
Thank you. That's really good. In the Bible, in 1 John 4:8, it says God is love. With this, the Course is in complete agreement. God is love, and you do want Him. That's in the text. And there are overtones of seeming fear around the happy message, God is love. That's also in the text. He will appear when you have answered Him, and you will know in Him that God is love. This is what Jesus is saying. This is where my example of going on from the New Testament. God being love is also happiness. That's in the workbook. The thought, God is but love, and therefore so am I, is given as a daily thought for 10 lessons in the review number 5 in the workbook. So that's just an example of what is in the workbook. So specifically, there's a nice introduction to the Course. Then there's the text, which is very articulate, very, very clear. In most cases written in iambic pentameter, because the person that he was dictating it to, Helen Schuckman, was a Shakespearean expert. That was one of her hobbies. So a lot of it's in iambic pentameter. So it's beautifully written, except some passages are a little clunky, and those were days that Helen had a bad hair day. She just wasn't quite on. So there's the text. Then there's a workbook, which has 365 lessons in it, and one for each day, but it takes me a week or two to get through one lesson because there's just a lot of content there. And then there's a teacher's manual. And in your edition, they're all in one. And the teacher's manual is basically a guidance to how to be a teacher of God. What Jesus says in the teacher's manual is he doesn't want martyrs, he doesn't want sacrifice, he wants teachers. And so that's what it is. And then there are two other supplements that are really wonderful. Helen at some point asked Jesus if he would help her to understand prayer in the context of the course. So he dictated a song of prayer. And then, since her field was psychology, at some point she asked him if he would talk about psychotherapy. And so he dictated a pamphlet on psychotherapy. And both of these things are just so beautiful and so moving to read. And when you read these things, you see the Jesus that gave us the Our Father. You see the Jesus that gave us the Sermon on the Mount. Those are two very pure parts of the New Testament that have not suffered a lot of change through the eras.
Yeah. You know, my experience, this reminds me of my studies of Islam and the Quran. And we think about the Bible, you know, none of these things were written down, you know, verbatim, like we weren't taking notes, although when it got to the time of the Quran, Muhammad did say that he believed he got it all from the Archangel Gabriel, so that it was basically dictated to him. So I think we have some consistencies here in terms of the possibility that and the openness that there can be further information or clarification coming from the Lord in that regard. And and that whole idea about the teacher reminded me, I was just reading in the Gospel of John the other day when he reminded at the end, you know, telling Peter and the apostles to first, you know, feed my lambs, then tend my sheep, and then feed my sheep. And the last thing he says is follow me. And so here we need some more direction. So it's interesting here. Has there been much controversy to your knowledge in terms of, I imagine if people are more oriented towards the Bible, has there been controversy with regard to being able to receive this as a reliable, viable message from Jesus? Any of you, Mary Lou?
I remember when we first started, there were several churches in Santa Fe, and the ministers quoted from A Course in Miracles. And some of the churches have had study groups at the church of A Course in Miracles because they don't see any competition. And I think this is lovely when it's seen that way. And I'd like to just tell you how I use it. Personally, it's very simple. My life is very simple. I have only one goal. My goal is to have inner peace. That's my only goal. I live in the now. I don't think about yesterday, and I don't think about the future. I think about the present moment, and my only goal is to have inner peace, and it is working just great.
I'm glad to hear it.
And you know, the Course says too, the closest that you, in this life, the closest that you can get to heaven is the holy instant. The holy instant is the present moment, which we always have with us all the time. That's the closest we can get to heaven in this world. And when you look at a child, you can see how a child lives in the holy instant.
You know, it's funny, I wanted to mention something earlier when you were talking about guilt, kind of making fun of the movie Wall Street when Michael Douglas says, you know, greed is good. And I've been known to say that guilt is good. If you think of it in terms of like an engine, service engine soon light on your dashboard, well, it's good to know if there's something bothering you, you need to address it and then redress it and let it go. But if you let that light just keep blinking at you over and over, it's going to drive you crazy and people around you.
You bet.
Right.
Well, it's like pain. Pain is a good thing because it lets you know what's going on. So everything has a purpose.
Yeah, that's
You
good.
can learn from everything.
Well, in the very beginning of the course, the goal of the course, I probably should read that so I get it right, but there's
Where is it located?
it's right in the front. The course can therefore be summed up very simply in this way: nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God. And that's what Mary Lou said. And what the Course is about, and what Mary Lou's life is about, and hopefully ours are about, is about experience and living and experiencing peace and sharing that. And I think he says in the early part of the course that there are many paths, and I think certainly in our lives we've seen that. If those paths lead you to peace and harmony, they're good paths. If they don't lead there, then you need to listen more carefully to the Holy Spirit, because something isn't working in your life.
That sounds like good advice. And I think under my mezuzah, which is the symbol I have, is the highest, is also paraphrasing the highest commandment, is to love with your whole heart, love with your whole soul, and love with your whole mind. Well, I figured out eventually you can't love God that way, which the highest command is actually, unless you're willing to start with yourself.
Right.
And that I've learned through my own trial and error, the first level of love, before you can really love yourself first, you got to forgive yourself first for everything, real or imagined, and then forgive others. Because if you don't forgive yourself first, and if that doesn't work, then have compassion for yourself first in whatever dilemma you're faced with, and then compassion for others. And that seems to be, that forgiveness and compassion seems to be the grease to get the wheels going.
Well, go ahead.
I want to tell you, yesterday afternoon, I was at a memorial for Lapsang Lalunga.
Oh, yes.
The great scholar, Tibetan scholar, a very good friend, a living treasure, who was killed by a drunken driver a week ago Sunday. And Gigi, his wife, had someone read for her that she forgave the man who killed her husband.
Yeah.
That is what life is about. Forgiveness is the key to happiness.
That's right.
So true. So true. What was the last thing Jesus said? He's on the cross, they've killed him. He says, even if they're killing you, in effect, forgive them because they know not what they do.
The Course takes forgiveness to a level that I have never come with before, and it's almost like I can't even explain it, but it really made forgiveness work for me and understand what it was actually about. So it's a wonderful book if you want to understand the mechanics of forgiveness.
Well, and
We
then
only got a few minutes left, Don. Bob, please go ahead.
there's the 365 lessons are basically, how do you get there? How do you get to forgiveness?
It's the path.
Yeah, it's the path. It's a very clear path. It's not an easy path, but and the Holy Spirit, he says in one point, he said, you will make the Course as difficult as you need to in order to understand it.
The ego doesn't like the Course at all.
No.
Okay. Well, we've run out of time. I want to thank my guests, Mary Lou and Bob and Jose, to come in and talk about this remarkable book, The Course in Miracles. If you've never seen it, I recommend go to a bookstore, take a look, pick it up. My experience with the groups, typically they'll get together and read it. Everybody will read a section for about a half an hour, and if there's some questions, they'll come back around and discuss it. So it's helpful in terms of that. It's also the same if you're doing a Bible study. It's always better to have somebody with you and the rest of it.
May I say one thing?
In a second, we have...
Our job is to be happy.
It is.
That's it.
Well, I'm happy that you came. So on behalf of everybody here, our director Doreen, our camera people, Wendy and Russ, and everybody want to thank you for viewing. And please check it out. Go Google up and learn more about it on your own. And for those at home, want to thank you for viewing, and stay tuned next week for another program on spirituality.